Hello everyone, it's the Wandering Hermit here, back again. Just doing a quick video today on the Elder Futhark runes. Now, before I go into the various uses of them, it's just a bit of background on the runes themselves. Now, a lot of people refer to runes as an alphabet, which isn't incorrect, naturally, because it can be used as an alphabet. However, from what I've found looking into runes, that was not their originally intended purpose. When the runes first came to be used, and again there's much debate as to when this is in history, but it's thought that originally the runes didn't have phonetic values in the same way that our modern alphabet has today. So I'm hesitant to call it as an alphabetical system, but I much prefer to refer to it as a symbolic table, in the same way that early Egyptian hieroglyphs are a table of multi-layered symbols. So the runes themselves comprise 24 runes. Some argue 22, and that 2 of the runes are actually later additions, but again, we won't really go into that. If it is 22, then that lines up with the Jewish alphabet, as they have 22 base letters, and then additional letters are variants of existing letters, and so forth. So it can actually be said that there are only 22 runes, but I use the 24 rune system from the Elder Futhark. It's familiar, it's very easy to use, and it feels right to me. So what do we use the runes for? Now, typically people on a spiritual path, they think of the runes and they think of, rune casting for a form of divination. This is the most common use of the Elder Futhark runes. Not just those runes, people use the Anglo-Saxon runes for the same purpose. Some people use what they call witch runes, which are a more modern invention. Others use fairy runes, which are an even more modern invention, but again based on the same system. But the casting of runes is a relatively old practice. It's not as old as the runes themselves, and it's thought that the use of casting the runes for divination came about at a similar time as the use of tarot cards for divination, in the kind of great resurgence in ancient mysticism that happened during the Renaissance period. Now, whether or not the runes were originally used for a divinatory purpose, again, I don't really find particularly important, because even if they weren't originally used for divinatory purposes, I found that the application of runes for that purpose is very, very accurate and very powerful. So I do use the runes for divination. In fact, I use them quite frequently. I'm starting to use them more lately than I am my tarot cards, and that's saying something, because I usually do a daily draw for my tarot cards. I'm using the runes at least once a day, and I can't fault them. They are extremely accurate, they are very to the point, and they kind of don't pull any punches, in the same way that the tarot can really mess with your head by pulling up all of the problems that you might have. The runes do very much the same thing. Now, I've always wondered why the runes were so effective as a divinatory tool. I think it's because each rune represents an aspect of nature. Each rune will represent a particular plant, or they'll be associated with an animal. They'll be associated with a particular season, or they'll be associated with land formations, be it rivers, be it glaciers, be it mountains. And in this way, when the runes come up in certain patterns, then it triggers a subconscious association with that particular aspect of nature. And what we can learn from this is that the nature that is outside of us is reflected within us, and it's epitomized, it's kind of embodied within the symbols of the runes themselves. Now, This is particularly effective because just as nature isn't all kind or all cruel, the runes are exactly the same. They will treat you the same way that nature will. If you are weak at heart, the runes will basically tear you a new one. If you are strong in yourself, strong of character, and you're willing to actually really delve into the sort of the baggage that we carry, then the runes can really help you do that in the same way that the tarot can. Now, according to ancient Norse lore, the runes were discovered, not devised, but discovered by Odin. They were said to be devised by the Norns, who are the equivalent of the Greek fates. They sort of weave the web of weird, and they kind of determine the fates of gods and men. And there's a bit of difference in the stories as to why they made the runes, but the most common one that I've seen is that the Norns created the runes by carving them into the trunk of Yggdrasil, the world tree, in order to bind men and gods to a certain fate. And it's said that each rune is a map of fate itself. And by using these symbols, they were able to control the fates of men and the gods, binding them to mortality and such things. Since the creation of the runes by the Norns, the gods find that they suddenly start aging, which is why the goddess Idun comes up with the golden apples of immortality to regenerate the gods every spring or something like that. So in a way, the runes can be thought of as a cruel trick by the Norns. Now, the Norns are the relatives, maybe the sisters or the daughters of the primordial giant Ymir, who Odin and his brothers Vili and Ve killed in order to create Midgard. And I said that the runes are created in direct revenge for that act. So, if we think of it this way, then it explains why Odin does what he does, sacrificing himself on the world tree, hanging for 9 days and nights, spearing himself with Gungnir, and staring into the waters surrounding the world tree. He stares into the void, and on the 9th day, he sees the runes reflected back at him from the surface of the void. I always wondered, why would Odin go through so much trouble to discover something that he didn't actually know was there? And in the context of this story of the Norns' revenge for the death of Ymir, it makes a lot more sense, because the Volva's prophecy in Voluspa, the first book of the Poetic Edda, in that story, the Volva, or the seeress, tells Odin about Ragnarok, and she tells him that the gods will die, and it's the will of fate. This, I think, tips Odin off to the fact that the Norns have done something, and through his many wanderings, and with the aid of Hugin and Munin, he's able to discern some clues as to what that plan is. So, obviously, he sacrifices himself to himself, discovers the runes, and then delineates them to the rest of the gods and to mankind, so that the men and the gods may know their own fates and find ways to circumvent fate in order to cheat the Norns out of their vengeance, if you want to think of it that way. It's the whole idea of to know the runes is to know oneself, and when you know yourself, you can become the master of your own destiny. And that is effectively what the runes really help us do, not just in a divinatory purpose, but also as a system of magical working. So, before I go into the magical workings, I'll just talk a little bit about how I use the runes for divination. There are two primary methods that I use. The first is a rune cast in a typical sort of the typical vein of like casting stones or casting bones. I give them a shuffle, grab a small handful. I'll have a set space in front of me, usually marked out by a piece of string, and I'll cast the runes down. The ones that fall within the circle are the ones I pay attention to. Ones outside, I'll scoop those up, put them away. Now, of the runes in the circle, the ones that face down, that you can't see, I usually take that to mean that those runes don't want to be read. It's not the right time to know them at that moment, so I'll put those away as well. The ones that are left facing up are the ones I take into consideration. The one nearest to me is the rune that relates to the most immediate future, or that is the most pertinent to this particular moment. Or if it's a sequence of events, it's the one that's going to happen first. Or if I have a specific question, then it could be, this is the problem, and then as you get further away, it's a step by step of solutions to that problem. I also look for whether the runes are the right way up in relation to where I'm looking at them from. So, for example, Fehu, if it looks like, as it does with the two branches pointing upwards, like this, then I know that's the right way up. If it's the other way around and they're on this side pointing down, then I know it's upside down. Facing up, I'll take them at their typical meanings, or the meanings that I've come to know them by through my meditations. The notes of which you can find on my blog, The Wandering Hermit, entitled Rune-imations. There's 4 installments of that at this present moment. I've just uploaded my 4th one today, if you want to go and check that out. There'll be more in the future, so keep an eye on those. So if it's upright, I'll take it at face value. As I know that particular rune, I'll look at the various layers of symbolic meaning, the tree correspondences, because the tree correspondences themselves are very significant. If you look at all the aspects of what tree it is, you can take bits of that and apply it to the rune, and then apply it to the question that you've posed. If it's inverted, naturally I take the opposite meaning, or I'll take it in its negative aspect. On occasion, you'll get runes such as Gebo, which don't have a reversal, so you take it pretty much as it is, because a gift is a gift. You know, it's not like it's a gift that's given with malice, you know, something like that. If you get a rune without a reversal and you're unsure as to how it fits in with the reading, then look at the runes that are nearby to it, and they will give that particular rune more context. On odd occasions, I will find that a rune will be on its side, neither up nor down. This to me usually means that in relation to the question that I've posed, it's currently undecided, things are still hanging in the balance, or they are awaiting my decision in order to make things go one way or the other. This can be quite useful because they indicate crossroads in our paths. They show us when there is a choice to be made. And if we understand what that choice might entail, then we can be mindful of our choices in advance. This is just really, really basic stuff when it comes to rune divination. You can go much deeper into it, but I'll save that for other videos, or you can read about it in the blog articles that I've posted up. The other method that I've been using, which is a lot simpler, is just a 1 rune draw. I'll dip into the bag, I'll shuffle them round, a bit like a lottery draw really, and then the one that kind of falls comfortably into the cup of my palm is the one that I know wants to be read at that time. So I'll draw that one out in my open palm, as such, as if I'm reading a book. And whether it's up or down, then I can interpret its meaning. Or if it's sideways, obviously, as I just said, that can give me some real insight as to what I can expect for the coming day, or if there is an event coming up and I want to know how to comport myself properly. It's really good for giving us a bit of perspective in advance, and to be able to keep it in mind as a sort of focal point. And every action and thought that we have through the day, if we hold that rune in mind, we can say, how does that relate to the rune? And in that case, how does that rune influence how I should act? Again, it's much simpler than the cast, because it's just the 1 rune you're focusing on as opposed to several. Very quick, very easy, and very concise. In fact, recently I did a 1 rune draw and asked, what can I expect for the coming day? I pulled the rune Bjarkan, which is the one that looks just like a spiky bee, for those who might not know which one, what the names are. Or Barkana is another variant of the name you may be more familiar with. I pulled that rune. I thought, okay, so, you know, it could be the birth of something new, it could be a creative idea, it could, you know, it could be something to do with the feminine mysteries, getting in touch with my sacred feminine aspect or something like that. No, it was a lot more literal than that, because Bjarkan can also denote actual birth. Sure enough, the next day, my wife went into labour and gave birth to a son. So, the runes, as I say, they don't mess around. They don't beat around the bush. They just tell it like it is. It's then up to us to, you know, apply their various meanings in ways that make sense to us as individuals. So, divination aside, magical working is the primary sort of really potent use for the runes, which not many people actually engage in anymore. I think it's been mentioned by a good number of people in videos I've seen on YouTube that the runes are kind of being wasted on the magical community because they're not being used to their full potential. Now, I find that inscribing runes on things gives that the object that it's inscribed on a lot of power, which is why I mean, you see it with so many people who have the runes tattooed on their bodies. Now, oftentimes people just get an English phrase tattooed, but they substitute the English letters for the runes. Now, whilst this may look cool, it doesn't really have the same magical properties as using the runes properly when inscribing them. If you're going to use a word or phrase in the runes, it should be in the Old Norse, because then you're combining the runes in the correct sequence for how they are originally intended. So, maybe not in terms of tattooing myself, but if I want to inscribe runes to invoke wealth, for example, I'd pick all of the runes which... I could do this in one of two ways. I could either pick the runes which correspond to wealth, gift, prosperity, happiness, those sort of things, and combine them all together in a sequence which kind of tells a story of how I might acquire said wealth. Or I can actually take the Old Norse word for wealth and spell that out in the appropriate runes, because then you're drawing that energy in. Now, what I've found with a lot of Old Norse words is that the runes that make them up actually refer to certain aspects of the subject that word represents. So, king, for example, one of the old Germanic word for king is König, and the first letter of that word would be Kano, or Kaun, depending on the dialect again, which typically denotes direct action. It denotes leadership, transformation. It's the sort of fiery, powerful aspect of the leader. Otalar, or Otal, denotes inheritance, a sort of passing down of things from one generation to the next. And in old kingly tradition, typically, we know that kingship is passed from father to son. But it also represents the womb of the goddess as well, the womb of the mother. Now, in very, very ancient kingly lines, there was a belief that when a king died, the soul would leave and go into a birthing chamber. The heir, be it from the wife of the king or the daughter of the king, it would always be carried through a female of the kingly line. They would go into the birthing chamber, they would birth their son in that chamber where the spirit of the previous king resided, and when that child is born, the king's spirit would then inhabit the newborn child, and he would be reborn in his heir. Hence the phrase, "the king is dead, long live the king." Now, the fact that Kano is directly followed by Otal is quite significant in that regard when you're thinking of the story of the succession of kings. Now, the next would be Notir, which talks about necessity, it talks about hardship, it talks about resourcefulness and a lack of resources and having to find new ways to survive. Notir literally means need, and the job of a king is to see to the needs of his subjects. So you can look at each of the runes in the word and find that each rune corresponds to an aspect of what makes up that word itself. So all of the runes that make up the word for king relate to what a king is or what a king does. I find this really, really interesting. So when you're doing magical workings with the runes, as I say, it's good to write out the Old Norse word or the Old Anglo-Saxon word and use the appropriate runes. Or you can combine them in a way that tells a story in relation to what it is you're trying to achieve. Carving runes for protection is very, very common. Runes for self-empowerment is another great one. The rune Tyr, which looks a bit like an arrow, I've found is really good for self-empowerment because Tyr is the god of courage in battle. He's the god of justice. He's the god of righteous anger. And his rune, his symbol, denotes personal power and it denotes willful direction. Now, what is magic other than the direction of will? So I find that Tyr as a rune is very, very powerful in magical working. Each person may have a set rune that really calls to them and speaks to them. And whatever it is, if you can find out what rune really kind of resonates with your spirit, then meditate on that rune as much as you can, and it will tell you something about yourself that you probably didn't know already, or it will confirm things that you already know about yourself. But that confirmation really helps to consolidate who we are as individuals, and with that confidence that we gain from that consolidation, we can go forward and achieve more. So this is another great way that we can use the runes. Besides that, runes look really good for decorative purposes. So if you're decorating something, make sure that you're using runes that correspond to what it is you're decorating, because then you kind of imbue that object with its own power. You kind of amplify its power. These are just some really basic ways that you can use the runes, but even the most basic applications of rune magic are extremely potent. Now, I've only been working with the runes in this way for like the last couple of years, but I'm finding absolutely amazing results. So if you're interested in working with the runes, then I could recommend some books on the subject. I mean, a lot of people disagree with the guy, but Edred Thorson is one of the most popular writers on rune lore. There are many, many others that write on rune lore that are just as, if not more, accurate than Edred Thorson, more informative, and more varied in the way that they kind of see the runes. But again, if you are interested, then there's plenty of material out there to look at. If you want to ask me any questions about the runes, how other ways that I use them, or how you might use them for your own practice, then by all means drop a question into the comments below. I'll be happy to answer that to the best of my ability anyway. So I'm going to leave it there for now. I am going to be doing another video this week. I'm not entirely sure what about yet, but it's gonna be up by the end of the week. So until my next video, I want to thank you for watching, and I wish you all much love and many blessings, and may your gods be with you. Bye for now.